Okay, so I am live now, is what this thing is telling me. Um, yeah, so we're going to play this by ear here a little bit. I've never done this before, so this is a learning curve for me. If All right, so again, sorry, I'm rebooting here a little bit mentally because I'm trying to figure this out. It looks like the chat is now live. I've gone live. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna play this by ear a little bit and try and figure this out. So I appreciate all of you kind of bearing with me as this is the very first one of these that I am doing. Um, I am gonna go ahead and close a couple of things out that are going to drive me insane if I keep them open. Yeah, so chat is live. So if anybody has chat comments, go ahead and use that. I will try to pay attention to that. And my plan here is to do about a 30-minute live stream plus or minus. And we'll just kind of take it as things flow from there. So the idea for today, as I posted it, it's uncertainty and the role that uncertainty plays in creating fear for us. So I'm gonna throw on headphones here for a minute just to make sure that the monitoring on this is okay. Excuse me. Yeah, so one of the things that we do as humans is sort of try to understand both. Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna mess around here for a minute and try and get this dialed in. Okay, so all right, now for real, I'm gonna go ahead and start this. So as humans, we are programmed to look for patterns, and our pattern recognition is part of our survival architecture. Obviously, we are in an uncertain and weird time right now with the prevalence of COVID-19 / novel coronavirus popping up and people being asked to do social distancing, we're seeing major league sports, major attractions, our daily lives are being either shut down or disrupted pretty significantly. And that understandably causes a great deal of stress and anxiety as we try to understand why. Our brains try to fill in patterns to understand that. So we're going to go through a few things pretty briefly. I've written about this stuff pretty extensively, and those resources exist if you're looking for them. But I also want to share some resources with you that you can look to for ideas and things to do, things to study that might help you as you try and figure out what to do, partially with your time off, but also with all of this uncertainty and all of this fear that's going on. All right. So the first thing that I want to go over a little bit, and this is something that'll be familiar to anybody who has spent any time taking my fire service warrior classes, will be this this heart rate chart, sometimes known as Cooper's color code. My version of it is directly adapted from Dave Grossman and Loren Christiansen's book on combat. And this chart gives us a pretty good idea of how our bodies physiologically respond to anxiety and nervous system arousal, right? So all of us have probably experienced the feeling of having our heart rate elevate when we become scared. And that is a very normal human reaction to stress. And the reason for this is that your body is priming you to fight or to flee. So if we look at the color code chart, most of us are sitting somewhere between 60 and 80 beats a minute as kind of our normal resting heart rate. At this place in time, at this sort of physiological state, that means that we are kind of at a low ebb, where our bodies are not particularly alert to what's going on around us. We're not necessarily aware of what's happening in the environment really well. We're pretty zoned out, okay? As we begin to perceive threats or stress or an uncertainty, then what happens is our heart rate kicks up a little bit, and we kick up into this yellow zone. Now, when we say 80 to 115 or 90 to 115 beats a minute in that yellow zone, what we want to remember is that this is heart rate increase due to psychological stress, due to a perception of anxiety. This is not exertional stress. Your fine motor skills won't necessarily deteriorate because you are walking at 3.5 miles an hour and got your heart rate up to 115 beats a minute. This is not exertional stress. It is psychological stress producing this anxiety response, right? And we see these things happen as our bodies dump cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine to respond to a perception of stress. Our heart rate increases. What does this have to do with fear and anxiety as it happens right now? You'll be probably aware of the fact that our brains like certainty. We like to know what's going on. And that's because it is a survival mechanism, right? So really good book for you to pick up. Let me try and figure out how to get it on camera. The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. De Becker is a security contractor and very famous in the security contracting world. And I'm just going to read something real quick from page 25 in his book here, right? Nature's greatest accomplishment, the human brain, is never more efficient or invested than when its host is at risk. Then intuition is catapulted to another level entirely, a height at which it can accurately be called graceful, even miraculous. Intuition is the journey from A to Z without stopping at any other letter along the way. It's knowing without knowing why. You are a survival machine. You are the result of 4.5 billion years of successful evolution. The unsuccessful did not live to breed and pass their genetics along. You're the end result of that line of succession and successes. So what you need to remember is that you are first and foremost a survival machine. That's why if you are taking a walk in the woods and your brain catches sight of something out of the corner of its eye, it may recoil before it realizes it's a stick. Because interestingly, long and thin on the ground, maybe a stick, maybe a snake. Your brain processes these things through the amygdala is the biggest input that we have there, right? Visual cortex goes to the amygdala. The amygdala processes before we can have conscious thought. And it's one of the tools that keeps us safe. However, what have we done when we are recoiling? Our brain has filled in a blank. It has made an assumption and made a decision without having full information. One of the things that we can look at is a host of different research that talks about this. And I'm linking to one article in the description for this video. Non-stimulated early visual areas carry information about surrounding context. This article is from 2011. It's pretty interesting. More importantly than the article itself, it provides references which allow us to continue our exploration of information. And it points to the fact that when our brains are posed with novel or uncertain circumstances where we don't have full information, we are going to begin to create a narrative to fill in those missing parts and pieces, those blanks in our information. That is a wholly normal human response to uncertainty, but it is also something that can lead us astray, right? There's a very low consequence to recoiling in anxiety if there is a stick on the ground and not a snake. There's a very high consequence if there's a rattlesnake and you didn't recoil, right? So your brain and your evolutionary heritage has primed you to default to these, act as though this is the high risk situation. And we fill in the blanks accordingly. Here's the thing to remember in a time of uncertainty like this, is that those responses, while potentially effective and not problematic, not injurious in an acute environment, can have long-term deleterious reactions, right? So they can become problematic for us in the long term if we are constantly responding out of stress and anxiety without stopping to get a fuller picture of what is actually happening in the environment, what's actually going on. And this is something that is challenging, it's hard, but it's also something that's important for us to remember, right? So another really good book for folks, if they haven't picked it up, is Laurence Gonzales' Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. I use a reference out of this book pretty regularly when I teach, and it's the idea of bending the map. And Gonzales talks about how hikers, when lost, will have this tendency to ignore the reality of the environment that they're in and begin trying to make the map in their hand match the terrain, rather than trying to take the terrain, the real environment, and find where that ought to be on the map. So what happens is that when we begin bending the map, trying to make the map match the terrain instead of the terrain match the map, the problem that we get into is that we are creating a greater and greater separation between reality and our perception of reality. Again, these are very normal human responses, but potentially catastrophic ones. If you are bending the map, if you are trying to say, I believe I'm here on the map, and the terrain, I'm ignoring the terrain, I'm ignoring the reality of the environment because the map says I should be here. I think I should be here. The more you do that, the greater separation you create between the real environment and yourself. One of the things that I've taught kids for years when I've taught scouts, hiking, backpacking, things like that, periodically when you are hiking, you should stop, orient yourself on the map, understandably, right? Make sure the map lines up with the terrain, but you should also periodically turn around and look at where you came from and see if the terrain matches that way too. The reason for that is that as we begin to see things are not lining up, one of the easiest ways I have found to help reorient ourselves is to change our perspective. Literally turn around and look at how you got to where you are in the causal chain of decision making. Why am I at this place now? And if you go back and you backtrack things like your turns, right? Well, I turned left at the last intersection. Okay, well, on my map, I've now reoriented my map so that my map, my compass, all of these things are facing. Well, if I'm here and I've walked for 10 minutes, that last intersection should be about here. And I made a right instead of a left. Oops. Just turning that perspective around and asking yourself, how did I get to the decision point that I am now, can help find where you have gone astray in your decision making and where you are actually creating a greater mismatch with your environment. So how does that tie into what we're dealing with right now? How does that tie into this whole COVID-19, novel coronavirus, social distancing, all of these things? I think right now, and very commonly in times of uncertainty, we have a tendency to create stories, to create narratives, to try and explain situations. Human beings have done this from our earliest days. It's why we have myths about how the various gods that various people have believed in have impacted the world. We know, most of us, I don't know that there's a whole lot of people still worshiping Zeus, but most people used to believe that, well, Greeks believed that, Zeus was creating thunderbolts. People used to regularly believe that Thor was the god of thunder. Most of us don't believe those things anymore, and that's fine. We've come to evolve a sense of science and understand how weather works a little bit. We still can't predict it really well, but we at least understand atmospheric discharge. We understand how thunderstorms form, how lightning happens, things like that. But absent clear, predictable knowledge, it is in the human brain's survival interests to create stories, to manufacture an understanding. Creating an understanding gives us a sense of safety. It gives us a sense of security. It is how we dial down our stress responses to fear, to anxiety, because of uncertainty. That's perfectly normal. What's important is that we do take a moment from time to time, take a deep breath, chill out, relax, and ask ourselves, why do I believe what I believe right now? Why do I think this is true? Is my feeling, is my anxiety rooted in reliable, predictable information, or is it rooted in my brain telling a story? The story your brain is telling is an important one. We shouldn't dismiss, we shouldn't ignore the fact that our brains tell these stories. We shouldn't be upset with ourselves for creating these stories. Those are part of who we are, and to ignore them would be foolish. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up about creating the story. We shouldn't beat ourselves up because we are perhaps at times amplifying our anxiety. That's okay. Take a deep breath and ask how you got to where you got. Ask why you believe the things that you do right now. And then go back, turn around and look at where you came from. Look at the causal chain of decisions. And that can help dial things back. In this time of anxiety, in this time of stress, there is a philosophical movement that I turn to pretty regularly. Sometimes just for moments each day. Sometimes I'll sit down and rewatch or reread various things. And two of them that I think are really useful, I should say this, two of them that have been really useful for me. You may not like them, you may hate them. That's okay. But two of the things that have been really useful for me are a play by Samuel Beckett called Waiting for Godot, or Godot, depending upon how you pronounce it, and an essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, by Albert Camus. There are links in the description to this for a full version of Godot that you can sit down and watch, and it's on YouTube. There's also a link to a full version of the play that you can get online, so you don't have to necessarily order it from anybody. There's a link to a full version of Camus' essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Both Camus and Beckett were writing during and in the immediate aftermath of occupied France in World War II. They are writing at a time of grave uncertainty, fear, doubt. All of these things are playing into their psyche, and they are trying to process this idea of how do you exist, how do you behave in the world in light of this uncertainty. And what they end up coming to is these positions that are known as absurdism, approaching the world that we live in as inherently absurd. It is not necessarily following a pattern or a path that we can rightly claim knowledge of. Is there one? We don't know. Are we fulfilling some destiny or some aim? We don't know. We can believe that we are, but we can't say with certainty that it's happening. And we certainly can't say for anybody else that that's happening. So in light of a world that seems to be without course, without a teleological end that it will achieve, all we can do is approach it with this sense of this is absolutely absurd. And process that as, and yet, to use the words of Joseph Campbell, the meaning of life is the experience of being alive. It is absurd, it is awkward, it is filled with uncertainty and fear and doubt. Cool. That's fine. it is what it is. And that, again, if we pull back from the Stoics, we pull back to Epictetus and we think about that phrase, it is not the thing itself, but the view we take of it which disturbs us. We should remember that the narrative that we are telling about our experiences are part of where our stress and our anxiety come from. How we narrativize the uncertainty is part of it. So with that in mind, I want to talk just for a half a second here before I wrap up about why my family and I are practicing social distancing, why we are currently making use of the fact that when possible we are ordering groceries online. When we can't order groceries online, only one of us in the household is going out and going to the grocery store. Why we are doing things like wiping our counters down with sanitizer a couple of times a day, why we're sanitizing the handles and the steering wheel in our car if we do have to go out and go to the store, why we're practicing good hand washing techniques. Something that's been published, and I like this view of it, is that if we take the infection rate of COVID-19 as being roughly 1 to 2.5, right, that in 30 days, one infected person will have potentially, likely infected roughly 406 people. I believe that's what the graphic says. It's hard for me to read too. Whereas if we reduce our exposure, you will see this exponential decrease in the number of people that we as potentially exposed individuals can affect. This is the inverse relationship of what we look for in viral marketing, right? Or, to use another term, force multiplication. For those of you who have any experience or paid any attention to how the U.S. Army's Special Forces units work, the Green Berets, they are known as force multipliers. You send a 14 to 16 man Green Beret ODA into an area and they go and train 500 or 600 indigenous forces. A small number of people goes and creates a larger impact. You're watching this on the Fire Service Warrior YouTube channel. Fire Service Warrior on Facebook currently has 12,000 subscribers and fans. We've got 1,500 subscribers on YouTube, something like that. In 2007, when I started it, it was one guy sitting in his living room screaming in the darkness. The reason that there are more fans, the reason there are more people paying attention is because that growth happened slowly over time. That's the opposite of viral growth. But what happens is that as each of those infected individuals that came from that core of people has gone forth and taught other people, more and more people have become interested in the ideas. We can see that nationwide in the US and the fire service, right? The landscape of the fire service has changed because of a handful of folks who were out coming up with these ideas. Not all of them were part of the Fire Service Warrior community, but there are a lot of folks that independently started coming up with these more aggressive ideas about what to do about doing our job better for them. And now what do you see? You see conferences popping up all over the place because these groups of individuals have come together and created ideas and they're spreading it, right? That's the same thing. Right now, we don't want to be doing that. We don't want to be spreading things. This is the time when all of us introverts and misanthropes are leading the charge of hiding out and staying away, right? That's what we all need to be doing. And the reality is that there's a lot of things happening in the news right there now. There's a lot of contrary information that's popping up. And it's because this is a dynamic, rapidly evolving situation. Tomorrow, when I do this, I'll plan on doing it at 10 a.m. again, probably about a half an hour, and we'll see how these first 2 days go, and if you have feedback about a better time, let me know. But generally, I'm going to shoot for this 10 a.m. half-hour time block, and then we'll go from there. Tomorrow, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to talk about how we can process and understand the environment that we're in and begin to interrogate the ways we are looking at it. And that's going to get into something near and dear to my heart, the idea of John Boyd's OODA loop concept and how that can help shape our understanding of decision making. So tomorrow's going to be kind of an intro to the OODA loop stuff. Please take a look at the references, take a look at the suggested follow-up stuff down in the doobly-doo. It's right there if you need it. One of the ways that I'm able to do this, that I'm able to have the equipment to do this, all the stuff that goes into this, is because of the folks who support Fire Service Warrior, Adult Academy, and the No Filter Fitness Project on Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/Fire Service Warrior. And I'd like to thank our patrons right now for their help. So thanks, Kevin Richson, Travis, Chase Morgan, Eddie Crombie, James Klatsky. James, you're going to have to let me know how to properly pronounce your name. Justin Ide, Ryan Trader, Brandon Douglas, Brock Clapp, David Hinosa, Eric Chisholm, Zach Riddle, Andrew Murtaugh, Brent Wigland, Chris Bondus, Chuck Hammond, Craig Wall, Elliot Harris, Keel Samsing, Mark Bates, Matthew Spangler, and Steven. Thank you for the ongoing support and help in doing this. Again, I appreciate all of you who have feedback and ideas about how to make this better. Please send me a message either on YouTube or adultacad@gmail.com, and that'll give me some ideas about how this went. Again, first time, I expect that I'm, like so many things, going to get really into this and start figuring it out better. So with that, half an hour, thanks for your time. We'll see you all soon. Cheers.